When I got married, I didn't tell him I owned 3 apartments. When my grandmother passed away, she left me 3 apartments. 3. Not 1. Not 2. 3 entire pieces of New York real estate, just sitting in silence behind a stack of legal documents that only the notary and I had ever touched. One of them, the crown jewel, sat proudly on Madison Avenue with those heavy paneled windows and the kind of crown molding that makes realtors drool. It had that old money feel, the kind of place you don't renovate because the cracks are part of the charm, part of the price tag. But I never said a word. Not to my husband, not to my mother-in-law, and especially not during those exhausting Sunday brunches where they dissect my every word like it's some courtroom cross-examination. It's not that I don't trust them. Wait, no, that's exactly what it is. Because if there's one thing I've learned since slipping this ring on my finger, it's that secrets aren't always meant to be kept. But sometimes, they're necessary. My husband, Liam, bless him, has never been great with boundaries. Sweet guy, soft eyes, but let him in on something big, and suddenly it's group chat fodder with his entire family. And his mother? Don't even get me started. Evelyn would have that apartment listed in her mental portfolio before I could finish the sentence. Madison Avenue, she'd repeat, eyebrows arched so high they'd nearly vanish into her forehead. Well, that should belong to the family. You know, for holidays. Or a pied terra. Or maybe a wedding gift for Mason when he finally proposes to that nice girl. No thank you. So I kept my mouth shut. The notary, a stoic man named Glenn who has never smiled once in my presence, understood immediately when I leaned across his desk and said, "No one else knows. And I'd like to keep it that way." He nodded like this was the 1,000th time he'd been asked to smuggle secrets through legal paperwork. I didn't ask questions about his life, and he didn't ask about mine. That's the kind of silence I could appreciate. It's not like I'm planning to do anything with the apartments. Yet, right now, they're just options. Safety nets. In a world that's constantly shifting under my feet. Brunches that turn into critiques. Love that feels more like performance. Those keys in my drawer feel like agency. Like the one thing I own outright, both literally and emotionally. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed and Liam is asleep beside me, I imagine walking into that Madison Avenue apartment alone. Just me, the creak of the floorboards, and the faint scent of aged wood and lavender that still lingers from my grandmother's time. No voices telling me how I should decorate. No opinions on resale value. Just space. Space that's mine. And I know, if they ever found out, especially Evelyn, it would turn into chaos. There'd be whispers about trust, demands for explanations, questions about legality. But I'm not ready to share. Not yet. Maybe not ever. This inheritance isn't just real estate. It's mine. A part of me that I don't have to justify, compromise, or defend. And in a life where I feel constantly seen, this is one part of me that stays unseen. Just the way I want it. It was the 7th day after the wedding, 1 week of being officially married, still surrounded by gift bags we hadn't unpacked and half-written thank you notes I kept avoiding, when I opened the door and saw Evelyn standing there like she was staging a corporate takeover. Her posture was stiff, too upright for a casual visit, lips pressed together in that polite little smile she wears when she's pretending to be cordial but really wants to correct the way you breathe. And right next to her, briefcase in hand, was a man I didn't recognize, trim gray suit, rectangular glasses, the type of guy who only speaks when money is directly involved. It took me less than 2 seconds to understand he was a notary. What I didn't understand was why he was here. Evelyn didn't waste time. She brushed past me like she lived here, muttering something about how we needed to handle some family logistics, now that we were back from the honeymoon. The notary followed, quiet and dutiful, setting his things down on the kitchen island like we'd all agreed on this meeting beforehand. We hadn't. I stood there, still by the door, still in my slippers, trying to process the shift in air. I hadn't even had coffee yet. Evelyn sat herself down like this was her boardroom and opened a folder with crisp, heavy paper that already smelled like regret. "Victoria," she said, not looking at me. "It's just a simple post-nuptial agreement. A formality, really. Clarifies some property things. Standard in families like ours." Her tone made it sound like I should already know this. Like I was the one being difficult for not pulling out a pen the second she walked in. But I wasn't confused. I was insulted. Because the ink on our marriage certificate was still fresh, and now she wanted signatures on a second contract. One that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with leverage. I glanced at the notary, who was already clicking his pen like this was the 10th document he'd notarized this morning. He didn't blink. Just waited. "I think," I said, careful to keep my voice steady. "This is something I need to discuss with Liam first." Evelyn looked up then, eyes narrowing just slightly. "Of course," she said slowly, the way someone says "bless your heart" when what they mean is you're being naive. She gestured toward the pages. You'll see it's very straightforward. It just makes sense for everyone to be clear about expectations. Especially considering your, she paused for effect, family situation. That was it. That was the jab. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She knew about the inheritance. Or she suspected. And this little surprise visit wasn't just about documents. It was about control, power, making sure that what was mine didn't stay mine. I didn't touch the papers. I didn't even sit down. I told her again, this time firmer, that I wasn't signing anything until I'd had a full conversation with my husband. And even then, maybe not. Her jaw tightened, just slightly, but she smiled again. That same empty, plastic smile she always wore when people were watching. Of course, darling, she said as she stood. We wouldn't want you to feel pressured. But I was. That was the whole point. I felt like I was standing in a house that wasn't really mine, beside a woman who wanted to turn my marriage into a transaction and a notary who was already reaching for the next appointment. They left not long after, the contract still sitting on the counter like a threat wrapped in thick linen paper. I didn't touch it. I just stood there and stared at it, wondering how long she'd been planning this, and how long I had before she tried again. It started subtly at first, little comments here and there that I could almost laugh off, like when Evelyn asked whether we really needed 2 types of olive oil, or if I'd just been watching too many cooking videos. I smiled through that one. I smiled through a lot, actually, because that's what you do when you're trying not to look ungrateful, not to be labeled the materialistic wife, the one who married into the family and now has opinions about things that apparently aren't hers to touch. But it didn't stay small. It never does with Evelyn. One minute, she's asking innocent questions about our grocery budget, and the next, she's pulling up spreadsheets on her iPad about why we should diversify Liam's family assets into a vehicle-sharing platform she's thinking of launching with a few of her yoga friends. I wish I were joking. Every time she visits, I feel like I'm being audited. She'll glance at our furniture and start sentences with, you know, in our day, we invested in quality over trendiness, and I know that's code for, this coffee table looks like something from a dorm room. She inserts herself into everything. Our monthly expenses, our vacation planning, even our weekly farmer's market haul. One afternoon, I caught her whispering to Liam about how leasing a car instead of owning one could be a smart play for now, until they move into a better bracket. Like we were some underperforming stock she'd invested in too early. The worst was the conversation about her business, a wellness import company that somehow involved custom Himalayan salt diffusers and ethically sourced kimchi. She sat us down after dinner, completely serious, and started laying out the investment opportunity like she was pitching on Shark Tank. Except there were no numbers that made sense, just phrases like intuitive logistics and disruption of the traditional scent-based ecosystem. Liam, bless him, nodded through it like it wasn't completely deranged. When she turned to me, eyes sharp beneath her designer glasses, and asked how soon we'd be able to liquidate non-essential holdings. I had to bite my tongue so hard it left a mark. Non-essential holdings. She meant my money. My apartments. My secret. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and say that I knew exactly what she was doing, trying to inch closer to the one thing I'd kept off limits. But I didn't. I just sat there, smiling politely, pretending I didn't understand the question. Because the second I push back too hard, I become the problem. The gold digger. The difficult daughter-in-law. So instead, I've become an expert in passive resistance. I nod. I take notes. I run the numbers. And then I let her plans quietly dissolve into the void where I keep all the things I refuse to hand over. It's exhausting, pretending that her interference is some form of concern, that these unsolicited business lectures and financial autopsies are acts of love. They're not. They're about control. About reminding me who she thinks runs this family. And every time I swallow my pride instead of calling her out, it chips away at me. But I remind myself, I have something she doesn't. 3 apartments. One on Madison Avenue. Tucked away in silence. Unseen. Untouched. Unavailable for liquidation. And for now, that's enough to keep me quiet. For now. I should have known something was wrong the moment Evelyn smiled at me across the dinner table. Not her usual performative grin, but something colder, tighter, like a blade hidden under a napkin. We were all at her place. A family dinner that started with too many toasts and too little eye contact. Liam was at my side, oblivious, buttering bread, trying to keep the conversation flowing while I just kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then she said it. Soft, almost casual, like she was just making conversation. Victoria, I drove past that Madison Avenue building yesterday. You know, the one your name's on. The silence that followed was brutal. Forks stopped moving. Glasses stayed midair. Liam's hand froze above his plate. And me? My heart went full sprint, but I didn't flinch. I just looked at her, dead in the eyes, waiting for her to say it outright. But she didn't. She just smiled, sipped her wine, and added, I must say, you've done quite well for yourself. It's just odd that we're all only hearing about it now. That was the match, and the explosion came fast. She launched into this performance, voice raised just enough for dramatic effect, accusing me of deception, of hiding assets, of undermining trust. The word transparency came up at least 5 times, as if we were in a board meeting and I was the shady CFO about to be fired. I could see Liam turning pale, flicking his eyes between me and his mother like someone had yanked the floor out from under him. Then his sister chimed in, asking whether this was the only property or if there were more, and that's when it hit me just how fast these things spiral. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. Evelyn was doing all the talking, listing out imagined offenses like she'd been rehearsing them for months. She said I had manipulated the family, said it was concerning that I wasn't upfront about what I brought into the marriage, said this was why she'd wanted the post-nuptial agreement. Liam looked like he was about to speak, but she didn't stop long enough for anyone else to get a word in. Then suddenly, he stood up, chair scraping hard against the wood. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He just placed both palms flat on the table and said, "Enough." It shut her up instantly. He turned to her, not angry, but solid, unmovable, and said, "This isn't your business. You don't get to interrogate my wife at a dinner table like she's committed a crime. She inherited that apartment. It's hers, and she had every right to keep it private. You want to talk about trust? Try starting by respecting boundaries." Evelyn looked like someone had slapped her. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Liam didn't even wait. He turned to me, took my hand, and said, "Let's go." Just like that. I followed him out without looking back. The air was thick with silence behind us, and the only thing I felt was relief. Because the truth was out now, and for the first time since this whole thing began, I wasn't the one standing alone. We moved into the Madison Avenue apartment quietly, without the dramatic announcement Evelyn was probably expecting. No ribbon cutting, no family brunch, no group text with real estate photos and captions about the next chapter. Just a couple of boxes, a bottle of wine on the floor, and Liam lifting a crooked bookshelf into place while I figured out where to hang our wedding photo. It was strange at first, living in a space that had always felt like a secret, a vault of silence I'd guarded for so long. But it didn't take long before it started to feel like home. Ours. Not borrowed. Not negotiated. Not on someone else's terms. We used the rent from the other 2 apartments to fix this one up slowly, room by room. Nothing flashy. Just clean lines, warm textures, furniture that didn't come with unsolicited commentary. Which, of course, didn't stop Evelyn from commenting anyway. She visited once, uninvited, and spent the first 10 minutes running her hand along the kitchen counter like she was testing for dust. She didn't say much at first, just scanned everything with that critical silence she's perfected over decades, and then casually remarked that the dining table seemed a bit small for hosting, and asked if we planned on replacing the rug because it's giving transitional. I didn't answer. I just smiled and offered her tea. Her favorite subject now is children. She brings it up every time she visits, slipping it between conversations like it's a natural follow-up to discussing where we got our curtains. "It's such a cozy place for a baby," she said one afternoon, staring directly at me while Liam refilled her cup. "And it would be good for them to grow up with some structure. Routine. A proper family system." That's what she calls it. A system, like we're cogs in some intergenerational machine she thinks she's still running. Liam always changes the subject. He's better at that than I am. I just sit there, nodding, letting her words pass through me like fog. But slowly, something started to shift. She still comments, still hints, still asks questions with no right answers. But the edge in her voice has dulled. Maybe because she's realized we're not asking for permission anymore. Maybe because she's finally starting to understand that this life, this home, isn't hers to edit. She still talks about her business plans, still brings binders and prototypes when she visits, but she doesn't mention the apartment anymore. Not since Liam told her we wouldn't be investing. Not since he said, very clearly, "This is ours now, not a branch of your portfolio." It's strange, feeling this kind of peace. Not loud or dramatic, but slow, like dust settling after a long storm. The apartment doesn't feel like a secret anymore. It feels like a decision, a stake in the ground, a quiet, firm line that says, this is where we begin, on our own terms, in our own space. And no matter how many times she walks in with judgment in her eyes, she walks out with less of it. That's enough for now. We sold the smallest apartment, the one in Murray Hill that always felt like it was holding its breath. It was a smart decision, cleaner than I expected, and within weeks, we had the down payment for a piece of land upstate. A quiet corner of green with long tree lines and no neighbors for miles. It felt like breathing for the first time in a while. like claiming space that no one could lecture us about or rearrange with Pinterest boards and unsolicited investment strategies. Liam was all in. He walked the soil like it was already ours, talking about skylights and floor plans and where we'd eventually plant lavender. I didn't say much. I just watched him, heart full, mind still bracing for the backlash that would inevitably come. And it did. The moment Evelyn found out, she called it a waste of equity. Said we should have sat down with her before making any big decisions. Said she'd been working on a pitch deck. Her words, not mine, for a new expansion of her wellness company, and this would have been the perfect time for us to invest as a family. A family. That word again, weaponized like a guilt trip. She asked if we'd even crunched the numbers on what we were giving up in long-term rental income, if we understood how hard it would be to develop rural land, if we had a plan for utilities and zoning. She didn't ask how we felt. She asked for a return on investment. And this time, I didn't hold back. I told her clearly, not loudly, not with drama, just directly, that we weren't looking for permission, that our decisions weren't up for review, that the land was ours and the money was mine, and that building a home had more value than backing another salt diffuser prototype. She looked stunned, like I'd finally said out loud what she thought I'd always been too polite to say. Liam didn't flinch. He sat beside me, calm and steady, and when she started to spiral again about lost potential and family legacy, he simply said, "Mom, this isn't your lane. You need to stay out of our financial decisions." That ended the conversation. It didn't fix everything. Evelyn's not the kind of person who walks away from control without trying to replace it with something else, but it did shift something. A boundary clicked into place. Not one we tiptoed around. A real one. Solid. Defined. And I stopped pretending I didn't know how to build walls when I needed to. Because I do. I've been doing it quietly for years. Now I just do it in full daylight. The land is ours. The plan is ours. And for once, the future feels like it belongs to us alone. It happened in the middle of a storm, the kind that makes the lights flicker and the air feel heavy before the thunder even starts. Evelyn had stayed in the old house, the one she refused to renovate, still full of ceramic figurines and a staircase that should have been replaced a decade ago. She slipped. No dramatic fall, no screams for help. Just a quiet break that no one saw coming until the phone rang and Liam's face drained of color before he even said a word. She'd fractured her hip, complicated enough to need surgery, and her insurance, in true Evelyn fashion, was some boutique plan that sounded impressive until it didn't cover what mattered. There was no discussion, no debate. We paid for the surgery before she even made it to recovery. No conditions, no lectures, just a quiet call to the hospital and a confirmation email with the billing details. Liam stayed overnight the first few days, sleeping in those stiff vinyl chairs and drinking bad coffee. I brought her fresh clothes, helped her sit up when the pain meds wore off, combed through insurance paperwork she didn't understand but pretended she did. I didn't do it because I had to. I didn't do it to win points or flip the power dynamic. I did it because someone I loved was hurting. And for the first time, that included her too. The shift wasn't sudden. Evelyn didn't cry or beg or deliver some Oscar-worthy apology. But on the fourth day, when I walked in with a bag of magazines and a charger she hadn't asked for, she reached for my hand before I even got to the chair. She didn't look at me, just stared out the window and said, "You didn't know me this." Her voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. And then she said it, the words I never thought I'd hear. Not with sincerity, not without condescension. "I've been wrong about you. And I'm sorry. You didn't deserve how I treated you. You've done more for this family than I ever gave you credit for. You're not just his wife. You're family. You always have been." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just squeezed her hand, gentle but steady. And in that quiet moment, without contracts or conditions or business plans, something between us finally healed. Not because I'd fought for it, but because I'd chosen kindness when it cost me something. And this time, it was enough. Now there's a fence around our land. Not the kind you build with wood and nails, but the kind you build with time, with words, with 1,000 quiet moments where you decide what's worth defending and what's worth forgiving. We're still living in the Madison Avenue apartment while the house is being built, and every time we drive up to walk the frame and stand where our kitchen will be, where our son will take his first steps, I feel it. The life we carved out ourselves. Not handed down. Not borrowed. Ours. Our son is 6 months old now. A quiet baby with my eyes and Liam's patience. Evelyn visits every other Sunday. She brings food, not advice. She texts before she arrives. She holds the baby with a kind of gentleness I didn't think she was capable of before. She still has opinions, but she waits to be asked. And sometimes, I even do ask. Because somewhere along the way, we stopped trying to win and started learning how to coexist. Not perfectly, but respectfully. That alone feels like a victory. There's still tension sometimes. I still check myself, Still wonder if giving too much means losing ground. But I've learned something I wish I knew from the beginning. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're gates you get to open when you're ready, on your terms. I'm not afraid of being taken anymore, not afraid of being seen as greedy or guarded. I protect what's mine because I love who it helps. My family, my future, myself. We're building a home from the ground up. And for the first time, I'm not hiding any part of who I am. I don't need to. Everything we have, we chose. Together. With clarity. With effort. With love.